you're going to have a path that probably will have detours, sidetracks, turnarounds, setbacks, which every single remarkable person I know, that is the course of their life. They didn't get to it straight away.
Well, I had one job before I came, which was to bring the Vanishing China books, which are on the coffee table at my house, and I went all the way there, and I forgot to bring them back. But I actually think it's for the best because I'm not sure
the table
can handle them.
You're right.
It's a beautiful book, though.
Well, thank you.
Incredible. I was actually reading them with my 3-year-old, who obviously can't read, and he was just like enthralled. Just the pictures are incredible, and you would not believe they're that old. You know what I mean? Like, did you have to do a lot of restoration to get the photos?
No. First of all, they span 50 years. Some of them are only a couple of years old.
Right.
Some of them are 50 years old.
Yeah.
And no, I did very little. I did the minimal amount of photoshopping or retouching as I could, just because of the volume. I have nothing against photoshopping, but just like 9,000 to work on. So, I mean, to the practiced eye, some people can tell, well, that's film, and others is digital. But the other important thing is I never used a professional camera for the entire thing. So some were point and shoots, and others were just, I used a Lumix super zoom, and I had Nichromats instead of Nikons. So, so the quality varies, but you don't pay attention. It's kind of like audio.
Yeah.
You're listening to the melody.
Once you get into it, you don't stop caring.
Right.
No, there was something, I read this article once, they're talking about the white rhino. There's like one of them left and eventually it'll die. And so someone was saying, like, at some point, this will be the last photo of the last rhino, right? And there's something kind of beautiful and terrifying and humbling about the idea. I mean, the book's called Vanishing China, but like a lot of the stuff you took pictures of, it doesn't exist. Those people are no longer alive. That way of life no longer exists. And there's something very ephemeral, but also permanent about photography in that sense.
It is. It's a document. And even the people in those countries, even at that time, were not really aware of that because it's very regional and it was medieval. And now, of course, they're amazed at what their own country and region had, and they didn't see that themselves. And so there's a joy in kind of bringing that back. For me, of course, it's a time machine.
Yeah.
It's really I had the privilege of being in a time machine and living in medieval times.
Well, we think the past was this thing that happened a long time ago, but in fact, like, not only is it often not that long ago, as not even dead, as Faulkner said, but that there are people for whom it was not the past, but it was their life. Like, I was thinking about Jimmy Carter, who will probably leave us sometime in the next few months. And I've read a bunch of memoirs about his boyhood. And you go, this is a guy that grew up barefoot in a house without electricity or running water, ends up as the president, lives all the way into this age. I mean, works on nuclear submarines. But like, that is the span of a single human life. And you think about the lives that were there when he, like, what one human life intersecting at the beginning of his life was. It gets humbling and very distant very quickly.
You could argue that he's seen more change in his life than you will see in your life.
Probably.
I mean, going from, the
future would have to be pretty good or pretty bad.
I mean, that is an incredible leap from no plumbing, no electricity, no schooling, whatever that situation was, till now.
Yes.
That's a huge change. I don't think, here's what it is. I think materially, we're not going to see the same kind of change.
Yeah.
Most of the change we're seeing is much more conceptual and intangible.
Yes.
The material world's not going to change as much as he saw.
Well, Winston Churchill was personally there for the last cavalry charge of the British Empire, and then lives to see the Beatles.
Right.
And like there are lives like that.
Right.
That have that sort of connection to the past. I knew this guy here in Austin. He died 3 or 4 years ago. His name was Richard Overton. And when he died, he was the oldest man in the world. He was 112. And I was I was thinking, so I took my oldest, he was like 2 then, to meet him. And one thing I think about is like, my son will never meet anyone born earlier than that. Right. So like my son, however old he lives, he touches a person born in 1905 or 1906. But then, you think about who was the oldest living person when that person was born.
Right. Yeah, I did this idea that I think Tim Urban did even better, but of doing generations. And I would say, like, if you could touch somebody who was living and someone who's about to die, and that the number of generations between that to like back to Jesus or somebody is like only, it's not that many. It's like, what is it, a couple hundred?
Somebody told me it was 6 handshakes, like demonstrable people who knew each other, who touched. Queen Elizabeth arcing a huge punch.
Right, exactly, right.
But to go from Obama to George Washington.
Right. Yeah, like 13 generations or something. It's not very far. So you can actually imagine passing something verbally in that span.
Like when we think of oral traditions,
exactly,
not that many people.
So that's one of the things that we're trying to do at the Long Now Foundation is to encourage thinking in terms of generations rather than say years or days.
Yeah.
And with the idea that if you had a better sense of both your past, you would be a better ancestor into the future. So that's our goal.
Well, I found this last night, actually. I saw it on Reddit, but it was, I guess Thomas Edison did a bunch of recordings. He had that wax cylinder thing that could record.
Exactly.
And so he went and recorded a bunch of the imminent oldest people alive.
Right.
And I guess in 2012, a bunch of them were lost. They rediscovered one in 2012. And it's some French general reciting some lines from Shakespeare. I'm forgetting his name. But he was born in the 1700s. And that is the oldest recording of there's a photograph of someone from the 1700s, but this is a voice of someone born roughly before America was America, or around the time America is America.
It is amazing. But there's another lesson in those wax cylinders with Edison, which is that one of the things I talk about in technology a lot, which is that the inventors of technologies very rarely have any grasp of what it's actually going to be used for.
Yes.
Because Edison made a list after he did the phonograph of what he thought it was going to be used for. And number one was preserving the last words of the dying, like he did, to be transmitted. He thought that was a number one use.
Yes.
And that he had 8, 9, 10, and 10, like 11 and 12 was like, maybe you could do music. And so he was clueless.
Yeah.
And that's true now with AI and other things, is that people inventing it don't really know what it's going to be used for. We only figure out by using it.
Yeah.
And so I'm always amused that Edison would have been shocked by what we actually used his invention for.
No, and this like sort of publicity stunt he was doing with the device has these major historical implications.
Exactly.
Like I wrote about Florence Nightingale in my book on courage, and I'm just checking some facts, and I pull up her Wikipedia page, and it's like, lo and behold, there's a voice recording of her, and she's giving advice, in the thing, and you're just like, I thought this was this historical figure that was, there. Although you could read and study that there was some crossable chasm between then you're listening to their voice, and suddenly you realize that these people were people, and the distance between us and the past evaporates very quickly.
Yeah. No, and it's true. I mean, I got some cheap Roman coins, and to hold Roman coins in your hand and to realize that people 2,000 years ago were holding these. There's something weird
buying
about
bread or
right. and either lost them or they stored them somewhere to be found. And that's just, I don't know, that connection is just amazing.
I have a signet ring, not this one, that I don't wear for this reason, but it's a Roman signet ring. Like,
wow,
you can just slide on a piece of jewelry. It's from like 300 AD, so late in the empire, but you're just like, a ring is a ring. The same type of jewelry still exists. Fingers are roughly the same size. And you're wearing this thing that a human being, hey, should I wear the ring today? Or I'm a bit swollen and the ring is tight today. Just like people are people. And as much as technology changes, life doesn't change that much.
Right. That's Jeff Bezos. It's a little secret. He said he wanted to build a business around what doesn't change.
I love that.
And said what doesn't change is people always want better selection for cheaper. So, okay, I can build a business on that.
Well, I mean, I think this is why people go, how did the Stoics last? You know, how do they endure? And it's like they're giving really practical advice about dealing with the things that are outside of our control, which fundamentally remain unchanged. And this is what I love about your new book. Advice is advice, and people are people. And a lot of stuff changes, but more stuff doesn't change than changes.
Right. And that's true, by the way, for technology. Most of the technology in the world that we encounter is old stuff.
Yes.
Wooden tables, pipes, electricity, plumbing. And that's the majority of stuff.
Yes.
And that's like Alan Kay's definition of technology was anything that was invented after you were born. That's what we tend to think of it.
Yes.
And Danny Hillis modified that even further, saying technology is anything that doesn't quite work yet, which is an even better version of it. So, but really most of the technology is old stuff that have been around.
Well, I've talked to people a lot about this, people who love audiobooks, people who like ebooks. I go, this is also a piece of technology.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's
really good.
I wouldn't say it's a flawless piece of technology, but it's a pretty good one.
Right.
And it solves most of the problems of reading. Not all, like the problem of I want to read lots of books and carry them with me, that it doesn't solve that very well. But like as far as I'm sitting down to consume one piece of long form literature, the book does an amazing job. And I liken it to, you know, like in every sci-fi movie, like it's like the door is like, and then here we are living in the future and we're still using wooden doors with knobs.
Right.
Because it mostly solves the problem, right? Yeah. Like it doesn't need to be that fancy for most of what we use it for.
Except in a hotel or somewhere where there's lots of people and
it's still a door. I mean, you know, it's not some massive electronic force field door.
Right.
And you know, books do a good job.
Right. And we're surrounded in the studio full of books. But what was interesting was that books did lots of jobs. And they began to shed some of those jobs, realizing that it was not the best for them.
Yes.
So a telephone directory was like in a book form. But it's like, I don't really, the book saying, you know, I really didn't want to have that job of being a telephone director. So I'll shed that one.
Sure.
You know, and so there were
reference books.
It's like, no, that's not really the best thing for a book. So we're gonna give that job to somebody else.
Yes.
And I think you're right. The idea of having a bound sheaf of things is good. And I think we're going to come to the ebook version of this. I'm hoping for a leather bound, 100-page flexible thing that is readable like this with ambient light. But click it twice and it's a different book inside. But I have a really good one that I love the feel of it. It's really well worn. It's just the size and the format that I want. And I'll have a couple of them, have different sizes and brands, whatever. And that form factor is just luscious. But there is something marvelous about this permanence of books. And we at Long Now did a whole investigation about long-term digital storage, which is hugely problematic because there's long-term digital movage. I call it movage. The only way it is you have to keep moving it, migrating it from one platform to another because the platforms go away and they're not very stable. So if you are thinking about long-term storage of information, actually paper is very, very good as long as you keep it dry.
Well, and the funny thing is also, I end up reading a lot of older books that are out of print. So I go on Amazon, I get some book. It's either $200 or it's 2 cents, right? Because either nobody wants it and there's a lot of them, or everyone wants it and there's not a lot of them.
Right.
But like, I'll get these books and I go, oh, the technology was actually better before.
Yeah.
The book had lay flat binding.
Right.
You know, it was not meant, it wasn't printed overseas.
Right.
It wasn't meant to be disposable. You were meant to have this book in your family for a generation.
Right.
And so actually some of what we don't like about books is just a function of modern, you know, sort of commodity publishing, and not the, you know, the collected works of Mark Twain or whatever, which you bought from a subscription salesman in 1902 or whatever.
I have a 2-story library with a catwalk and the whole thing. And at one point, maybe about 10 years ago or something, I actually thought about de-accessing, getting rid of most of the books, moving to digital. But I changed my mind. I went to a library run by Rick Prelinger, which is, I walked in, it was like, something felt like I was in, there was like a beam of light going into the universe. It was this sense of power. This was the PowerPoint, almost like a sacred PowerPoint of the world, because he was collecting weird ephemera stuff, like telephone books.
Yeah. Huh.
Things that people would normally throw away, zines, all kinds of stuff. And so I realized that actually we're at like peak book right now. The books will never be as inexpensive as they are right now because they'll stop printing them over time. There'll be fewer printed. And
there's already fewer printers.
Exactly, right. And the ones that are around will become scarcer over time. And so like books have never been as expensive or cheap as they are now, and they will not ever be again. And so I decided to keep my library because I think over the long term, they're going to become a little scarcer. The paper books.
Books are kind of in, you could say, like in a state of managed decline.
Right.
And every once in a while, like during the pandemic, when books became popular, or when like the Obamas publish a book and they're like, they sell suddenly like 5 million copies of something that, you know, it clogs up the printers because there's only a couple of them.
Exactly.
And there's only a few major publishing houses.
Right.
And like I have a book coming out in May, and then I have a book coming out the following May, the Daily Dad book, and then this will be the third in my Virtue series. But like the publisher's already like, we have to lock in a date if you want a slot from the printers, because consolidation and then also like elimination has meant that there's fewer and fewer printers. And so while, yes, we're at this weird convergence of people still read quite a bit, the trending signs are not in the right direction. And so, you know, as they try to get as much in real-time inventory as possible, they're reducing the capacity to make new books.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about your new book. What is the difference between feedback and advice? Because you talk about as one gets advice, how one asks for it can determine whether you're getting feedback or advice.
Feedback will often include criticism and complaint. Advice tends to be a little bit more positive and forward-looking, and because someone's giving you advice, it's usually not about like something you did wrong in the past. It's usually about next time you do this, or it's
here's what I would do.
It's forward bent a little bit more, and therefore it's I find it's more actionable.
Interesting. So yeah, I think that's a good point, because people go, "Oh, I'm going to go get some advice," or they
for feedback. So it's like if you put up a request to give you feedback on the book that you just published or article you wrote, that's likely to include a lot of criticism or things that people didn't like, which is a good signal. But if you asked for advice about the article you just wrote, I think the other thing too, I had not thought about this. I think there is more of a sense of they're more empathetic because they're maybe trying to put themselves more in your position or more thinking of you as they're giving it, more than you would do if you asked for feedback.
Well, I think what I take from that is how you ask for advice, who you ask advice for, how you frame what you're looking for determines the quality of what you're going to get.
Fair enough.
So like I'll give you an example. When I was thinking of opening the bookstore, I had a bunch of people who were like, "Oh, it's very awesome. You should definitely do it. It's exciting." And I obviously thought it was a good idea.
Right.
So I said, I need to get some advice or feedback from someone who's going to give it to me straight.
Right.
And so I called Tim Ferriss, who I thought would actually tell me. I basically called Tim and I was like, tell me why I shouldn't do this.
Right.
Of all the people who tries to eliminate hassle, expense, imposition,
outsource stuff.
Yeah, thinks efficiency, and also just approaches it from an unusual angle.
Right.
I was like, this is a person I want to get advice and feedback from. And so I basically said, why should I not do it?
Right.
Because so many people had said I should do it.
Sure.
Now, I might have gone to Tim for the exact opposite reason. Sure. Also, if everyone said it was a bad idea, why would you think it was a good idea? But Tim actually gave me great advice. He basically said, what I would do is whatever you decide, like think of it as an experiment. So I'm opening a bookstore forever.
Right.
He said, think about it as I'm opening a bookstore for 2 years.
Sure.
Which is also the advice he gives people who are thinking about starting a podcast. He says, say I'm going to do 6 or 10 episodes.
Sure.
Don't extrapolate out what the burden of doing it is going to be forever. And then also don't just do one, and if it doesn't work, write it off. But I think deciding whether you're trying to get confirmation or disconfirmation, do you want what that person would do, or do you want them to think about what you should do? And so all advice is not created equal. How you get it and who you get it from is really important.
Well, what you're suggesting, and I totally agree, is if there's a skill in asking for advice.
Yes.
Not just giving advice and skill, but there's a skill for asking and receiving advice, which is absolutely true. And I think that, it's like lots of things, you can get better at it.
Yes. Well, and first off, the idea that advice is really important, because I think a lot of people go, I'm going to figure it out myself. I'm autodidactic or whatever, or they don't like. They just, I march to the beat of my own drummer. There's a line from Bismarck I love where he says, any fool can learn by experience. I prefer to learn by the experience of others. To me, advice is how you save yourself painful bumps on the head. Right? Hey, there's a beam. Be careful, and so I think advice is critical, and yet probably weirdly undervalued and underrated, because people prefer to learn it by painful and error, by painful trial and error.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. No, it's and that's sort of why I began jotting down little bits of advice, and my assignment was to reduce it to a sentence, to take a whole book.
An epigram.
And make it into a little proverb, a little axiom, a little thing that I could remember, that I could repeat to myself as a reminder to change my behavior.
Sure.
So I remember at Whole Earth, there was this thing Ann Herbert, I think, first told me, which is, when I get invited to do a talk, to go somewhere, to have coffee with someone, to meet, whatever it is, ask yourself, would I do this tomorrow morning?
Yes.
That was like, because most of the time it's like, no, don't want to do it tomorrow morning. So those that can pass that kind of immediacy test, you're golden. And so I when I get the invite, I repeat that all the time. That's really interesting. Would I want to do that if it was tomorrow morning? I don't think so. So that's the kind of thing that I was trying to do, was to make it into, put a little handle on it by making it memorable and something I could repeat to myself. It's also transmittable like a tweet, very nice, but it was actually originally thinking of it just as a container for me to hold it and grab it.
The best version of that I've heard is hell yes or no. Right. Like either you really want to do
Derek
it
Sivers,
or
right?
don't. Yes.
Yeah.
And
that's very equivalent.
Yes.
And all these have ancient sources and ancient heritages, a lot of them. I mean, I made up some of them, but I'm sure deep down, maybe I heard it. I don't know. But that's the whole thing about influences. They can't be unraveled.
Or someone, independently, like convergent evolution. Multiple people came up with the same concept.
Right. So my study of science is that the norm for all invention, all creation is simultaneously independent. That is the norm.
Yes.
Not just in science, but also in the arts. And so, yes. So I tend to think that things are created in the commons. We can give a little bit of a tiny, short monopoly to encourage people to make them real, and they should go back to the commons as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think obviously not just seeking out advice from people, and I want to get into some of the specific advice, but like to me, reading is we're talking about books, reading is the way to not have to learn everything by trial and error.
Right.
General Mattis has talked about, like, he basically says, people have been fighting wars for 5 or 10,000 years. They've been writing books about it for about 5 or 10,000 years. And he goes, if you're a leader of troops in battle, he says, it's unconscionable for you to try to learn lessons by experience.
Right.
Because that experience is paid for in the blood of other people, maybe even yourself, when someone else has been in more or less the same situation, not only learned a lesson, but then wrote a book about it.
Right.
Or someone wrote a book about that experience. And so, advice isn't just a nice to have thing. It is, there's almost something selfish and reckless about not availing yourself of the fact that somebody, I like to say, somebody either smarter than you or much dumber than you has been in the same situation, and you should benefit from what either of them did, or but what both of them did.
Right, exactly. Yes, I think you're 100%. And then there's just in terms of not advice but reading. One of my bits of advice is that the best schooling you can give your kids is to read to them by far. It'll be more impact than anything else that happens in their lives if you read to them. And it's so easy to do. So
one of the pieces of advice I liked in the book, you say, don't try to be the best, try to be the only.
That's my core song.
What does it mean?
Don't aim to be the best, aim to be the only. There's a lot there. There's a natural drive for us all to be excellent, to push towards becoming the best in things. And indeed, elsewhere I talk about trying to become master of a skill, and that's actually a better way than trying to find your passion in the beginning.
Sure.
So this idea of kind of mastering and become the better and best is a natural thing, but the idea is that it's not far enough.
Sure.
And the kind of holy trinity of anybody's career is to work on something that you love, to work on something that you're good at, and then to work on something that's well paid.
Yeah.
Right. And if you can have that little overlapping Venn diagram, like you're golden, but there's another level beyond that, and that other level is being the only person to do something, or doing it in your own way that no one else can do, or to do something that nobody else can do, and that is where at that point your true genius is, because everybody has a different face and a different combination of talents, and there'll be some combination of talents that each person is capable of, and I truly, truly, truly believe is unique and different, and we should enjoy, and we should be sharing that. There's kind of you need to do your art, because otherwise you're selfish and you're keeping it from us. And so there is a sense in which aiming for that position where you are the only person doing this, or you're doing it in a way that only you can do, is one, good for society, we're not replicating, and good for you, because you are now in a position where you don't have competitors. You don't need a resume, right? And so the thing about that I want to emphasize is that that's a very high bar. Knowing that, coming to understand what it is that you can do different or better about something, for many people like myself, takes almost a whole life to get to. You can be going in that direction, but to actually come at you're actually never even done. You're always figuring out. And I've had the honor and the luck to be around very remarkable people, some of them very famous, billionaires, and they're still working on it. Having $1 million doesn't answer that question of what it is.
There's a whole list of billionaires.
Exactly. And so this aim to be the only, and it's related in some ways to another piece of advice in the book that's maybe careerish, which is that if at all possible, you want to work on something that nobody has a name for what it is that you're doing.
Sure.
That kind of takes a long time to explain to your mother what it is. And that means that you're kind of working at this, there's a greater chance that this is going to be something about you and your only skills. But for sure, you'll probably won't have that much competition. And it's much more likely that that is the place where a breakthrough will happen, or the frontier, because those usually happen out in front of language.
I do agree. It's the work of one's life to sort of do the thing that only you can do,
right,
to sort of carve out your niche, to have the field totally yourself. But there's also something actually very attainable and accessible about it. If you think about it, it's like each of us have a totally unique sort of set of DNA that's never existed before, will never exist again. We have a totally unique set of experiences. We exist in a moment in time that will never exist again. And so it's almost strange, if you think about it, that we're all the same, that we all work on the same things.
Right.
Like, it's almost as if we are working to deny our own unique and inherent God-given monopoly.
Exactly.
It's somehow we're going the opposite of the direction that we should go.
100%. Like, you want to be in your own movie. You don't want to be an extra in someone else's movie, and that's often where we are. But the thing about it is, you're right. In some ways, when you are there, it seems inevitable and obvious, and it's the easiest thing to do because it fits all your natural abilities. But the difficulty is not actually being there or getting there. It's the fact that we are seduced and distracted and in some ways following these other examples of how people become successful. So it's actually kind of unlearning, in a certain sense, all these other examples. Like, well, success is being a basketball star. Well, that's a very limited amount of people, or success is being a movie star or YouTube star, whatever it is. When to figure out an alternative form of it, if you could get there, it'd be totally natural and it'd seem really inevitable. But finding that means that you're going to have a path that probably will have detours, sidetracks, turnarounds, setbacks, which every single remarkable person I know, that is the course of their life. They didn't get to it straight away.
Well, it takes courage to sit alone, to stand apart, right? There's weirdly, although you would think you would want the field all to yourself, there's a certain amount of comfort and safety in the competition or the crowded area. And this is why,
it's confirmation. It's kind of like you're confirming. Right.
When I went to my publisher and I said, hey, I want to write this book about an obscure school of ancient philosophy, they were not like, cha-ching, like it seemed like a crazy idea. I took half for that book that I'd taken for the last one. Now, tons of people write books about stoicism because it was popular. And so, like, the loneliness of doing a thing that either no one is doing or very few people are doing or no one in your area is doing, that is, obviously courage is charging lonely, the sole person into the field of battle and running into a burning building, all of that. But there's also the courage of like, I'm going to be myself, even though that's weird, even though the odds are stacked against that, even though people are telling me it's a bad idea. You have to be comfortable being the only one doing the thing, which is weirdly the scary part.
And it is. It's not often comfortable, particularly when you're starting out and young and you haven't had any successes. You will certainly question yourself all the time. Am I totally crazy? Is this stupid? And by the way,
it may be.
It may be.
Could be a terrible idea.
And that's the thing. And this is the weird thing, is that you're kind of navigating the thing where sometimes you actually do want to be listening to what people say around you, because here's the thing. You cannot do this on your own. You cannot find your place and who you should be all by yourself. We are just too opaque. You need your family, your friends, your clients, your customers. You need everybody around you to help you find it, because
I still had to have an editor on that book. I had to, I had to find an audience. You're not doing it for an audience of one, or it's probably not too commercially viable.
You can do things for audience, but in terms of helping you find out what it is, you need that feedback from outside, because not only are we opaque to each other, we're opaque to ourselves. And I know this from my work with the quantified self and other stuff. It's like we don't have an easy access to even how we make our own decisions. how we proceed. And so we need these outside signals to help us make those choices as we go through. And so if you are really, doing it by yourself or on your own, you want to be careful about that.
Yes.
You want to do it in the right way. I think solitude is absolutely necessary to be creative, but being lonely is not. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness.
Well, and there's a problem I find with a lot of creative people. They go off in their cave to make their thing because that's what that's their image of the artist.
Right.
And then they make a thing that's only relevant or interesting to the people in that cave, which is one person.
Right.
You have to have a relationship with the audience, a connection to the audience, a back and forth with the audience, if you want this thing to matter to other people. Now, it could just be this is solely a cathartic creative experience, but if you're trying to make something that helps or works for other people, you can't.
You have to have other people involved.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly, right. Yeah, if it's an audience of one, when I do art for the audience of one, and by the way, most of the 30 million AI-generated images created each day have an audience of one.
Sure. You asking the computer to make something for you.
It's just a pure pleasure of seeing. It's like going out into a meadow, doing a hike, coming up, the lights perfectly against the blooms at that day for that hour, and no one will ever see it again, but you were there and you enjoyed it. So audience of one is fine, but if you were doing something where other people are going to be valuing you, then you have to involve them in the process.
Right. Yeah, I heard Peter Thiel say one time, competition is for losers, which I love because talking about courage, it's harder to run a race against yourself, right?
It is.
It's harder when there aren't people keeping score, telling you you succeeded, you didn't succeed, you're a winner, you're a loser.
Right.
To race against yourself, to hold your own standards, to do a thing where you're the only one doing it, that takes a kind of a fortitude, a strength, a self-awareness, a self-containment that people who just want to do what's popular or easy just don't really fully understand.
Yeah, it's tough. So you have this paradox, or dilemma, these cross tensions of being smart enough to ignore other people when you need it, and smart enough to pay attention and quit when it's not working. So this idea of the virtues of quitting are part of this process. And you were talking before about these iterations. That's another piece of advice, is that you want to prototype your life instead of making grand plans.
Yes.
This idea you're kind of iterating towards things instead of making, I'm going to make a bookstore and I'm going to move there and it's going to be forever. No. It's like, it's a trial, it's an experiment, it's a prototype. We try something. If that works, we go forward. And that idea of prototyping was absolutely something I wish I'd known when I was younger, because I've been a maker all my life, but I didn't know about prototyping. I didn't know about this iterative process, even in writing. I thought that if you made something, went all the way to the end, and it didn't work or whatever, that was kind of like a failure. The new model is you build one to throw away. You write a first draft to throw away.
Sure.
You evolve and iterate towards it, and that's been transformative. And I really wished I knew that when I was younger.
Yeah, I think if you have more of a vague idea of where you want to end up and you're open, it makes it easier for you to admit error, makes it easier for you to acknowledge and learn from mistakes, and it also makes it easier for you to course correct.
Right.
Whereas if, like Paul Graham says, keep your identity small.
Right.
If you identify with everything you're doing, if there's a very specific outcome that you have said, this is success, anything short of this or different than this is not success, it makes it hard for you to go, I really hate being a lawyer. I probably shouldn't have gone to law school. But the ability to be like, no, actually, here's what I want my days to look like, or here's when I really feel fulfilled, or there's actually seasons for things in my life. If you think about it that way, I think you have the ability to adjust and you're flexible. Whereas, if you're identifying with any one thing too strongly, you're sort of blinding yourself, and then you can get stuck really easily.
Well, that also extends to beliefs and positions. So the danger of having your identity around certain axioms or conditions or doctrines is that you can't change your mind.
Yeah.
Because then you have to change your identity.
Yes.
You want to have your identity revolved around your character or values.
Yes.
That aren't going to change. And
right, focus on the things that don't change.
Exactly right. And so the other thing too, I would say in the same kind of vein, is that if you should be really careful if your positions on one situation or one question can be determined by your position on others, you are likely to be in a grip of an ideologue.
Yes.
Right?
Sure.
Real
or
people,
a tribe.
Real people with complex personalities and many dimensions to them are going to be slightly unpredictable.
Yes.
Because they're thinking for them, literally thinking for themselves, and having decided, and they're not going to be consistent. And so, and also, by the way, if you're too predictable, it's too easy to be replaced by AI.
Sure.
One of the reasons in the modern world that you're going to want to have a sense of not being that predictable by your things is because you'll be more you. Right?
Yes.
And so there'll be less likely that you could be imitated.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of what you're reading. Like, how often do you read things that you disagree with? Right? How often do you change your mind? How often do you find that you agree with this person or this school of thought on most things, but not these three or four things? And that's a sign of intellectual independence. It's a sign of thinking for oneself.
Right.
And it's also, I think, a sign that you're being active, as opposed to you've solidified and this is just simply who you are. Now, you can get into trouble, right? Because I think, to me, actually, one of the dangers of our time is not just groupthink or misinformation or disinformation. And I think you see this most in Silicon Valley, is this kind of contrarian thinking, which can serve one really well.
Yeah.
But if your thing, like Mark Twain says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, pause and reflect.
Right.
He doesn't mean, as a knee-jerk reaction, think the opposite of the crowd at all times. He's saying, pause and reflect.
Right.
Most of the time, you actually probably should end up on the side of the majority. You should have a couple things that you're contrarian about, but it's not just, I do the opposite of what most people do. That's actually less independent thinking, because you're almost being wrong on purpose.
Right. We were talking about how most of the technology in the world is old. Most of the things everybody knows are true.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Everybody knows. Most of the things that everybody knows are true.
Yes.
And as Carl Sagan said, they laughed at Galileo, they laughed at Einstein, and they laughed at Bozo the Clown.
Yes.
Okay, so
they laughed at a lot of people who were totally wrong.
Totally wrong. And so, being contrarian about everything is as ideologically dogmatic as anything else.
I think it's interesting in real time to watch Elon Musk sort of do this on Twitter, where you're just like, that can't possibly be a position that you thought yourself into. I think that's a position of you taking the opposite of the position of someone you don't like, or trying to be someone that other people don't like, right? And that sometimes can work, and sometimes it can work in a huge way. It's almost a dangerous lesson for a maverick thinker, and I know you're sometimes identified as a maverick, is like the thing that got you there. It's like you can only be a maverick about a couple big things, or you end up being a crazy person, because you've rejected all the foundational tenets of society. Like Diogenes the Cynic is fascinating, right? The philosopher who lives in a barrel, he questions. It's like, yeah, he was right about some things, but he also lived in a barrel. Like you end up becoming the person talking to themselves on the street. You can outsmart yourself, essentially.
Yeah. So the ability to change your mind, my little saying is that you're only as young as the last time you changed your mind, and you do want to be able to change your mind. But as you said, you can only be a heretic to some degree. You have to have some orthodoxy to function, because most of the things everybody knows are true. And if you're questioning everything, that's that's wasted effort. It's unproductive. So that is, and so that kind of light touch, that stance of getting into this, all the things we've talked about, there are tensions. There's an art to this. It's not a rule bound thing. There's trade-offs involved. So it costs you something to be contrarian.
Yes.
So you got a limited budget, my contrarian budget. Where am I going to spend it on? And I have this idea. My definition of heresies are things that you believe that the people that you most respect do not believe, and you probably have a contrarian heresy budget to spend on. And so, where is it worth taking a stand and kind of investigating and putting your energies, because it will cost you something to do that.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend who's sort of always questioning stuff.
Right,
Why do you have to do it that way? What about this way?
Yeah.
Someone was saying that he was very Socratic, and I agreed. And I said, I just think it's worth pointing out, or as a reminder, they did kill Socrates. You have a limited budget. You're only going to be put up with for so long, and you got to figure out how to choose your battles.
Exactly right. And it's not so much the questioning; it's like, again, it's just, if that's the only thing you can do.
Yeah.
So I mean, the great people to work with are people who do maybe question a lot, but then I think what they call it, loose. Let's see, there was something like open debate and then high commitment. And this is what we try to practice at
Loose
Wired.
opinion strongly held.
Well, loose opinion strongly held is one, but there's another sense of it within a group, which is that we're going to kind of question everything, but once we decide what we're going to do, there's no questioning anymore.
Yes.
And that's sort of what I have found in working, where, yes, there's this period of time, we'll question everything, but once we decide, there's no more questioning. We're going to go forward.
Because what's obnoxious is always questioning, and then not standing for anything.
Right.
There's no there.
Right.
And so it's almost, in a way, the easiest thing to do is, well, what about this? What about this?
You can't do that. That's not going to work whatever it is. So so it's like, let's question everything. And there's this, and it's very much like the difference between the creative and the editing functions that you do. So there's a moment where everything's up for grab. It's blue sky, no judgment. It's going to question everything. And then in the second phase, it's like, no, we're just going to hammer down, no dissent. We're moving forward. We're going to optimize. And then you go to the next period, where the next level, and it's, okay, now we're open up again for, mistakes, whatever else. And so I think you do have to divorce those two functions almost.
What advice do you have for making better decisions? Or let's say big decisions?
Yeah. Well, so that's a good question. The
biggest decision I made early in my life that I could have used more advice on was a decision you also made, the decision to drop out of college.
Right.
And I realized that there wasn't anyone who could really give me good advice on this thing.
Sure. I think we kind of touched on this. It's like an experiment. So you want to make it, you want to do it so that you keep your options open. You don't want to burn bridges behind you. You don't want to step into something where you reduce your options.
Sure.
So like for college these days, taking a gap year is one way to kind of try out this idea of, maybe I shouldn't be here at all. Let me see what it looks like if I don't can I keep myself busy and moving forward? So a gap year would be one way to drop out of college without burning, leaving options open. Getting married, people, they live together. They have all kinds of ways in which you're going to try that out.
Sure.
So I think that I would emphasize this idea of prototyping your life rather than making grand decisions. Make iterative decisions that you could reverse. And most decisions, except for, I don't know, getting a leg amputated, are pretty reversible.
I think understanding that things are reversible is really freeing and probably a good piece of advice unto itself.
Okay.
Right? Because like when I was dropping out of college, like I remember I went to the registrar's office and I said, I'm here to drop out of college. And they were like, that's not a thing. they were like, you can fill out this form. And I actually just found it. They were like, it's $60 to pause your classes.
Right.
And then they were like, you can come back literally whenever you want for the next 10 years.
Right.
And I remember thinking, Well, I wish someone would have told me this, but sometime during the last week when I was torturing myself, and then sometime when I went to my parents and they more or less disowned me for this, life-changing decision, which was actually just a one semester break on auto renew, right? And so we tend to think, oh, if I do this or that, that's me forever.
Right.
And it can never be undone.
Right.
And when you talk to people I remember when I was thinking about dropping out of college, I talked to someone who was like, they were like, I got mono in college and I had to spend a year in the hospital or something like that. Maybe it wasn't mono, but they were like, I spent a year in the hospital when I was in college. So I graduated in 5 years. And he was like, do you know how often this has come up in my life? Never, right? And realizing that, even if it took me 11 months to figure out this was not the right decision, it would be a blip.
Right.
So when you understand, hey, I'm quitting my job to start a company, that it feels like the craziest thing in the world to do. And then you talk to a million people who've done that exact thing. For some of them, it worked out. For other ones, it didn't work out. You realize, the stakes on this are actually lower than I thought.
Right. So I'm trying to think of how, this is my little assignment to myself, is how I reduce this all to this little tiny phrase. And it's sort of like the best way to make big decisions is to not make them big.
Yes, to make the littlest decision.
Yeah, to reduce all your decisions to a series of little decisions. And I think that's what you're doing with the prototyping. You're trying not to have big decisions by making a bunch of little decisions.
That's right. How do you lower the stakes?
Right.
So then you can actually be more rational.
Right.
Because you're not thinking, well, is this worth my entire future?
Right.
Well, your entire future is not actually on the table here.
Right, exactly.
The next 6 months are on the table
here.
And if something outside of your control disrupted the next 6 months of your life, you go, okay, right? Like I thought about that during the pandemic. It's like, hey, if I got sick for a year, or if we took a year off and traveled, we'd go, what an amazing adventure, right? This is so cool.
Yeah.
Or hey, I'm so glad I survived.
Right.
I wouldn't be going, the lost year of my life, I'll never get that back. I wouldn't be angry, right?
Sure.
I would, and so finding the other thing I think, what's another way to phrase this? What's another angle to look at this? Not the one that's intimidating you or scaring you or whatever.
That's one of my pieces of advice for young people, again, is to spend a year or something like that living as cheaply, as simply as you possibly can. I mean, like living in a tent, like almost like a homeless person, living in a tent, a cabin, whatever, eating beans and rice, spending almost nothing. Use the local library, whatever it is, just like see how little you can get away with, because that'll be your worst case scenario, and you will have lived through that. And when you have to make a decision about, well, what if all fails and I don't have any money or income? It's like you've already practiced that. You're not, and it won't be scary. You'll be empowered. It'll be an adventure at that point. And so that's another way to kind of take the wind out of these big decisions, is to rehearse what the down view, that the less optimal scenario, what that would look like, and you'll discover that it ain't so bad.
Seneca says we should actually do that one day a month. He says 1 day a month, you should wear your worst clothes, you should eat the worst food, you should sleep on the floor.
Right.
You should, he says, practice basically the life of most of the people on the planet.
Right.
And then he says, when you get through it, you can go, this is what I was so afraid of.
Right.
And I think that is really important. When I think back to, when I'm sleeping on a futon on the floor, and making no money, and it wasn't just not that bad. I loved it. Like I think back to those as the good old days, right? And then you go, oh, actually, if there was a lean year or a disrupted year, 20 years from then, I wouldn't again be thinking, what a tragedy. I would be going, that was an experience.
Exactly. And kind of aligned with that is another piece of advice in the book, which is that if you can, while you're young, spend a bunch of time doing things that don't look anything like success, that are crazy, demented, unhinged, completely unprofitable, out of the ordinary, uncommon, dumb, a waste of time, all these things. The further they look like success, the better, because as you go on, that experience will become your touchstone and the thing that you will return to, and oftentimes some basis for your later success.
What, speaking of parents, because I have this, my next book is The Daily Dads. It's one piece of parenting advice every single day.
All right.
What advice would you specifically give parents? You're a parent.
I have 3 kids. So there are some parenting advice in the book. One of the ones that was sort of surprising to me is when we were kind of disciplining, setting up household rules, we let the kids choose the punishment for the thing. And they were much harsher than we would. It's like, okay, here's what it is. Like, what do you think should be the consequences of if, you were to break that rule?
Yeah. And
how should we do it? And they're kind of like, they're going through it and they're saying, oh, I shouldn't have candy or no dessert, whatever it is. Okay. And that's that. And when you have them participating in that, it's very powerful.
There's buy-in.
Right. Another bit of advice, again, something I wish I'd known earlier. I almost have a regret about it, but it was to invent as many rituals as you possibly can. Traditions, rituals and stuff. And a ritual is almost defined as if you do it 3 times in a row.
Okay.
It's a ritual. And it doesn't matter whether it's like deeply symbolic or religiously significant. It's just something you're doing. And the key thing is there has to be anticipation.
On Christmas morning, this is what we do.
Well, yeah. Or on Sunday morning, for 20 years, every Sunday morning, I made pancakes. That was something. And like, there was something comforting, grounding, incredibly anchoring about something as simple as that on Sunday morning, there will be pancakes, I'm be making pancakes. And so there's, Austin Kleon does the pizza night on Friday night without fail. There's something about that. So even things like that, or there's seasonal things you do, or there's annual things, or things that you do at a birthday, or there's things that you do to evoke, start the games. We say a grace before every meal at dinner. That's our ritual, and everybody's ready for it. Everybody participates, and that's what our family does. And so you want to have things, and the related bit of advice for parenting is that is thinking of the family as a unit and trying to develop an identity to the family that the kids can join, so that it becomes their identity, so that their identity is widened to include the family. And that, again, is very anchoring, so that our family does X or our family does not do X, and being able to actually articulate that, so that that's what our family is and does. And that's, as they get older, becomes more and more, again, of an anchor in their own identity, is I'm part of a family, and our family does this or not that.
There's one I actually have a coin on my desk, so I look at it all the time. And it just says, all time is quality time.
Yes.
Or it's all quality time.
Jerry Seinfeld.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard his rant on
he
that.
said garbage time versus quality time. He says, forget the quality time, give me the garbage time.
Right.
And so I shortened that for me is that it's all quality time.
Right.
That being stuck in traffic is quality time.
Right.
Sitting on the couch is quality time. Going to school is quality time.
Right.
Any time, because you think about it as like a parent, you're like, we're going to take them on this big trip.
Yeah.
Like, we're going on vacation. And then you forget that driving to the airport is part of the trip.
Sure.
And being stuck at the airport is part of the trip. And waiting for your bags is part of the trip. There's no moment when the quality time begins or ends. It's all quality time. If you choose to, one, be present for it, not be an anxious, nervous, stressed out mess, which I am find myself falling into all the time. And if you're not in some anticipation mode of, I can't wait till we get there.
Right.
Because you don't know if you're going to get there, but know you're all in the car, strapped in right now.
Right.
Let's enjoy that.
Yeah, I think so. It's, there's, I was just going to say something, but it's that idea of, the way I would say it in my book is that you should spend half as much money on your child and twice as much time as you think. Time is, children are just not at all generally sensitive about lack of money or how much money you have. It just doesn't register. What they are paying attention to is how much time you're giving them, which they're very sensitive to.
I saw a thing, it was like, what was a rich kid growing up? And it was like a kid whose parents picked them up from school. Right? And because they had time, like they had freedom. It might actually be, those might be the parents that actually didn't have any money because they weren't sending a nanny or something to do it. But it was like, I love that in two senses. One, it was time, but two, rich was like, you got time with your parents.
Right. Well, so I actually have a totally different definition. I think the rich have money and the wealthy have time. Sure. It's much easier to be wealthy than rich. Yeah. And by that definition, I am the wealthiest person that I know because I have had a life where I have constructed my life to have total control of my time.
Yes.
And that has made me wealthy beyond belief. I was with a bunch of billionaires doing a walk, and I was boasting to them that I was the wealthiest among them because they were all bound by their billions.
Yeah. You go, what are you doing after this? Oh, I'm getting in my private jet to fly to this other thing, And you go, when are you seeing your kids?
Yeah. No, it's I can very safely tell every single one of your listeners that do not get $1 billion. Do not.
Yeah.
Try your hardest not to have $1 billion because that is such a burden and a burden on your family, and it does not answer the questions of what you can do that nobody else can do.
Well, I was actually just writing about this for the Daily Dad email recently. It's like, we all know that getting $1 billion or having generational wealth tends to wreak havoc on the family. The kids fight about it in the will. They get a cocaine addiction. They drop out of private school. We think about that. And we know that it's like, we know that, hey, there's rapids ahead or a dangerous waterfall ahead. And yet, what are we doing? We're paddling as fast as we can towards that exact outcome. Yeah. Like, you go, what are you doing? Oh, I'm trying to make more money. We all want to strike it. Even though there's another part of us that deep down knows that might well be the worst thing that could possibly happen to your family.
Yeah. I was just trying to find in my little book about my advice about this, but here it is. Aim to die broke. Give to your beneficiaries before you die.
Yeah.
It's more fun and more useful to them. Spend it all. Your last check should go to the funeral home and it should bounce. So yes, it's like you don't burden your kids. I like Warren Buffett's bit of advice, which is I'm going to give my kids enough money that they can do what they want to do, but not too much that they can't do anything or don't do anything.
I have two maybe rules. You could tell me how you think about them as sort of epigrams or rules for parenting. Number one is what was it? I just forgot it. Number one, I got it from Bruce Springsteen. He said, "We can choose to be an ancestor to our children or a ghost, right? Do we haunt them or do we guide and inspire them?" And so I think about it like, am I?
You mean while you're living? You mean like while you're a parent?
Living and after we're gone. But so what are the decisions you're making today?
Yeah.
Or tomorrow or after you're gone? Are you a thing that haunts your children or a thing that inspires and guides and supports them? Right? It's like you're going to be the voice in your child's head.
Yeah.
Right? You think about where the voice in your head came from. It's eerily similar to your mom's voice or your dad's voice. And is that a positive voice or a negative voice?
Okay. All right. Good.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I'm just thinking of my own parents right now. My parents, one thing I did learn from them was I paid much more attention to what they did than what they said. Sure. And that's how we raise our kids. And the interesting thing about this book is we didn't give any advice to our kids at all. We never said any of this.
Right. You tried to live it.
We tried to live it, and it worked. It really.
Well, you struggled with it. You showed them that you were struggling with it.
And actually, people have asked, because I wrote this kind of originally for my children as adults, trying to put it down. The question was, well, what did they think of this? And so I sent the gallery to my son. And I said, people want to know what you think of it. He's 26. He said, well, no prompting at all. He said, I never heard you say any of this, but you actually were trying to teach us that.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, wow, okay, that worked. That really worked.
The Stoics would say, don't talk about your philosophy, embody it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, really true. They're going to pay much more attention to what you do than to what you say. And so you want to embody it. And that is, that's really good. There's also, maybe this is your next book, there's grandparent advice. There's grandparenting. And here's I have now a new grandparent. And I've been around, my mother-in-law lived with us for years. And so we've seen grandparents in action. And here's the thing that I say about grandparents, which is when you're grandparenting is not parenting, it's grandparenting. And that when you're at parents' house, parents rules, grandparents' house, grandparents rules. So one of the things is that we can have different rules than our kids do for theirs, but when they're around us, they're going to follow our rules and whatever it is, our tendencies. And so that's another level of how do you be a good grandparent.
I have thought about why do kids seem to like grandparents sometimes more than their parents, and why do parents who struggled end up sometimes being great grandparents?
Yeah.
I think suddenly they've stopped caring so much about things that never mattered.
I think you're right.
And I think that's a lesson of how often, like as a grandparent, if you're doing it right, you're not sweating what they're wearing, you're not sweating this or this or this or that. And you're much more accepting, and your love is much more unconditional, which it should have been all along.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that now that you said it, we've always been grandparenting our kids.
Yes. You've been, that's what an ancestor too. Is there more as an example, a moral force, and not a strict disciplinarian.
Right.
Or a tyrant.
Yeah, so we didn't parent our kids. We just grandparented them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm going to write about that. The other one, there's a song by the Highwaywomen, and they talk about the crowded table. And I've taken that to be like, what is success as a parent? It's hard to define what success is, right? And so I think a lot of people default to, as they do in life, we were talking about, how much money does my kid make? How many grandkids do I have, let's say? Or did they marry the right kind of people? Did they marry up or down? Are they in a prestigious profession or no? And to me, success, when you're older, if you're still lucky enough to be here, success is going to be your kids are around. They want to be around you. Yeah. Like they could live all over the world, but do you have to call and hound them to come home for Christmas? Are they secretly miserable the whole time they're visiting? Or do you have people around you? There was a writer I was reading about once. He was talking about how, his kids were all home for something. He and his wife went to bed early, and they could hear their kids talking in the living room for hours. And he wrote, it was the poet William Stafford, and he was saying, he turned to his wife and he said, this is the eulogy that we get to hear. His kids having fun together in their house after they'd grown up and moved away. And so I that's when I think about the decision, when I think about who I want to be and how I want to parent, especially when they're a little bit older and I'm less in charge, it's not that I want to be their best friend, but I want to sweat the right things so that when they have choice, they choose to be around.
Right, exactly. You're 100% correct, and that's our experience as well. And I also think that going back to the crowded table, there's one of the affordances that if you are lucky to afford is to have the extended family, cousins, grandma, to have them around. There's nothing that I think helps that towards that kind of a success, because that's part of what we found. We had a large extended family. My nephews and niece lived with us at different times. And so even though we had only 3 kids, they were part of a larger group of siblings. And that is some of that also, again, going back to your role, it kind of eases your role as a parent because you have these
other people
co-parenting.
Yeah,
Basically,
sure.
it's not just you parenting them; it's the other adults in their lives, which are really essential. And I love that picture of that as a success state, a victory state, is to have your kids, which our kids do. They want to travel with us.
Mm-hmm.
They want to go with us when we're going somewhere. Why can't we come? They're adults, right?
Right. They call you to tell what's going on, ask for advice.
Exactly. Everything like that. And so, so yeah, I think that is a good thing to aim for. And if I may offer some unsolicited advice to parents, have as many kids as you possibly can have. You will never, ever regret it, those additional ones. Absolutely. And there is no overpopulation problem.
Sure.
It isn't there, and it's certainly not in this country. Have as many kids as you possibly can, and everybody's situation is different, but you will not regret that. And the kids love it. Our young son was asking us for a little brother all the time because it was so much fun.
So as we wrap up, you've written many books. This is a book sort of advice. I imagine you're starting to think about legacy. How do you think about, and we talked about vanishing China at the beginning, like nothing is here forever.
Yeah.
How do you think about the ephemerality of life? Obviously, I think one of the most interesting things about the Stoics is, the idea of memento mori, tempus fugit. How do you think about that?
I've been thinking about my own mortality since I was very, very young, and I've always been aware of it. I had a religious conversion when I was 29, and I had the assignment to live as if I was going to die in 6 months, which I did. And that book of The Bicycle Across is actually my journal of coming to my last days.
What changed for you thinking in terms of a 6-month time span?
Well, the thing I realized as I literally did everything to prepare for that is that there is this, the future is taken away one day at a time.
Yeah.
It's like, what, you're going to not be here. You don't think about the future. And I realized how vital it is to have a future.
Oh.
It was really very, very, what was the word? Sobering, despairing not to have a future. And so, so I became much more interested in the future after that rebirth, when I regained my time. And, so I feel I have completely rehearsed already. When I was very young, I rehearsed like being prepared, saying, no, I mean, I am ready. I don't want to go, but I am prepared to go. And so I have a countdown clock, which I have been running. I started, 15 years ago or so. And it's, took the actuarial table of my average lifespan for someone born was, taking that date and turning it into days left that I have. And on my computer, it counts down each day how many days I have on average, typical thing. And it's very, very sobering and very, very motivating, with 5,082 days or something. All the stuff that I need to do. So much to do. So so that I find that kind of focus, and there are 2 kinds of death. There is the death where you kind of expire, you're gone. But more tragically, I guess, is the idea that at the best, maybe 3 generations of people might remember who you are, but very, very unlikely that generations beyond that.
When the Stoics would say, you're not going to know whether it's 3 generations or 50 generations.
Right.
Like, their posthumous fame is not a thing. Legacy is not for you.
Statistically,
yes.
I'm saying, yes, there could be somebody, you might do something amazing, and then remain, but statistically, you're not going to be remembered beyond 30.
But I'm saying that even if you are, it's not for you, for that to be the thing that you spend your life trying to if you spend your life trying to beat that statistical average, that is a waste of your life.
Right. So I think about that a lot, and what it drives me to is just, I take not a single day for granted. I try to really think about, is this what I want to do today? Because I have that choice. I'm lucky enough to have decide what it is I want to do with my time. And so I'm very, very aware of it. And I also, a number of years ago, did a very large, oversized graphic novel called The Silver Cord, which was kickstarted and successful at one level. And that was about robots and angels. And the idea was that there was these other realm of intangible beings. We can call them kind of souls.
Sure.
That would ensoul each human being born, so that the souls came from these angelic beings. And the angelic beings they spent all their time, they were completely obsessed and craving embodiment. Because when you had the sensual thing of enjoying, mangoes and bare feet in the grass and the whole thing, and they were just like, oh my gosh. But more importantly, when you're embodied, you have impact.
Sure.
You can affect things. You can hit somebody. You can influence them. You can't do that when you're all disembodied light and stuff.
Sure.
And so they were just weeping at the fact that we were squandering our ride here.
Yeah.
They were just like, oh my gosh, if I had a body, this is what I would be doing. And you guys are complaining about whatever it is on Twitter. It's like, come on.
Right. Right. You have the thing every other animal on the planet would kill
every
to have.
Angel in the heavens is dreaming of. And so I'm very aware of this sort of the shortness of a ride, the fact that this is the most incredible ride that we'll ever have, and trying to, optimize, maximize that for that time that we're here. And so that's what I think about.
No, that's beautifully said. And I imagine at the end of that 6-month exercise, 6 months and 1 day, that was an incredible day. That day when the end that you'd imagined, when you got the future that you had written off, like Seneca says, if you go to bed each night going, that's the end, I've lived my whole life. You wake up the next day and it doesn't matter how bad the weather is or how bad the traffic is. You're like, this is wonderful.
No, yeah, it was a total rebirth. You hear the Christians talk about that's what it was.
Again.
I was born again. I literally went to bed, and when I woke up, I remember opening my eyes, and I suddenly was like being born.
Wow.
And I had the rebirth experience that I did not have when I converted. And so so that kind of looking forward, and I know that, sometime I'm not going to wake up and there will be the end, but I feel as if I'm not afraid of that. I don't welcome it, but that's not distorting my time here.
Well, it sounds like you've got a great memento mori practice, but I thought you might like this. This is a coin
challenge coin.
A challenge coin, but it says memento mori. And then on the back it has a quote from Marcus Aurelius. He says, you could leave life right now. He says, let that determine what you do and say and think.
Well, thank you. This is really, really great.
The way Seneca talks about it, which was life-changing for me, a piece of advice, he says, don't think of death as something that happens in the future. He says, think of death as something that's happening right now.
Yes.
He says, because the time that passes belongs to death.
Yeah.
And so actually we're dying every minute, we're dying every day. Death isn't a thing you do one time, it's a thing you do literally every second that you're alive.
Right.
And that changes your relationship to time and locks you into the present.
Right. So let me read the penultimate little bit of advice.
Let's do it.
Your goal in life is to be able to say on the day before you die that you have fully become yourself. That's
perfect. That is success that very few billionaires have probably been able to say.
Right.
And yet anyone, no matter what their circumstances, disadvantages, era, religion, that it's equally accessible to all people. It's not to mean it's easy, but it's accessible to all people and probably has more of an impact on the world than some great fortune or invention.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.